Redditors who were a missing person. What's your story? Story 1 in 2nd grade. I fell asleep on the school bus ride home and missed my stop. My mom always waited at my stop to meet me and freaked out when I didn't get off the bus. The bus driver looked back, and since I was lying down fast asleep, he didn't see me. An hour later, I woke up at a random school bus terminal on the outskirts of town, and my mom had phoned half the town freaking out. Funny story to tell now, but my poor mother was convinced I had been kidnapped for a solid 2 hours. It really took a lot out of her. Story 2, not me, but my brother was missing for around a year, had disappeared before, but only for a few days. He suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and would often get delusional, but this time he didn't turn up. We live in NYC, and my parents had no idea where to look for him. They'd regularly go to the police station and look at pictures of bodies that had turned up. He didn't have any friends or girlfriends we could ask about him. He had just vanished. A year later, we got a call from a hospital in D.C. My brother had been picked up on the street, nearly dead from malnutrition. Had gone to Washington to warn the government about something or other. He oft had refused to eat, believing his food was poison, and lived on the streets for a year. The only reason he survived was because other homeless people took care of him and convinced him to occasionally eat something. He was a skeleton when they found him, full of flea bites. Eventually, my parents nursed him back to health. He's still mentally ill, but hasn't tried to disappear again. I think about him whenever I see a homeless person. Story 3, I was kidnapped by my biological mother and missing for 3 months when I was a year old. My bio mother has a horrendous crystal meth habit. Took me during a court-mandated visitation and kept me in her various user-sellers' houses. When I was found, I hadn't been changed in days. I was in damp clothing, and I'd been given cough syrup daily. To keep quiet, she was arrested and eventually released. Story 4, when I was young, probably about 6, I think. My family went on vacation to Yosemite. We stayed in a small cabin at a campground. I met another kid who was a bit older than me, and we went exploring. Apparently, we went a bit too far and eventually ran into a bear cub. We just stood and stared at each other for a few minutes and went our separate ways. When I got back to the cabin, I found out that park rangers had been out looking for me because my parents had no idea where I was. For some reason, they didn't think my bear story was as cool as I did. Story 5, my sister once had the entire neighborhood, the police department, and God knows who else out looking for her. It turns out she had crawled behind the sofa and fell asleep on top of an air conditioning vent for about 5 hours. My mom went inside as the sun started to go down and sat down on the couch to cry. My sister then crawled out from behind the couch and started petting her on the head, asking her what was wrong. Story 6 was never reported, but my dad once forgot me at a CAF in the mid-90s during a time when local police was looking for this guy. Because everyone was paranoid at the time, my mom had made me learn my full name, my address, our phone number, and my parents' work phone numbers by heart. And so when people realized that I was alone, they were able to call my mom at work. Shortly after my dad showed up, absolutely horrified, he had forgotten that Head taken me with him. Make your kids learn your phone number by heart. Story 7, got tired of my dad kicking me out of me. So I ran away at 15. KSB found me less than a week later drunk, as in the train yard by where I lived. Dad was pretty upset, but he got sober and stopped being after that. Story 8, it was my first day in kindergarten. I was supposed to go to the after-school daycare, but I lost the note saying I was supposed to, so the teacher shoved me onto the bus and told the bus driver where I lived. Not sure if that's actually how it went down, but regardless, they made me leave. The bus drops little 5-year-old me off at home. All the doors are locked, and my mother wouldn't even get out of work for another 2 to 3 hours. So I do what any little kid does. I sit on my front porch and cry. Luckily, I live right across the street from the high school, and this angel of a woman sees me from the bleachers while a soccer game was going on. She comes over to check on me and stays with me the entire time. Meanwhile, at the school, the staff is going crazy because I'm nowhere to be found. My mother was called, and as I'm told, crying profusely. Then out of the blue, I see this 1960s brown Cadillac pull up, and over walks my principal. He thanks the women for taking care of me and brings me back to the school. Because of my situation, they suspended my teacher and the bus driver, and I never do anything without proper paperwork at it. Just talk to my mother, and apparently the teacher left because of major medical issues at the time. Story 9, my mother was on the phone with the police after I fell asleep in a cemetery for 7 hours after school. I had a home life, so I'd be anywhere and everywhere I could be to not go home. Beginning of the school year was still really nice outside, so I decided to hit the Dunkin' Donuts near my house, grab some coffee, and I walked to the cemetery that was maybe 10 minutes walk from my house. There was a really nice mausoleum in the cemetery, which happened to be the structure at the highest point in the city. So you can, on a clear day, see about 15 miles. I chilled there for a while, just kind of thinking. About 300 feet away is a statue of Jesus on the cross with other figures. I was kind of tired, so I laid a little ways away from it, just enough to get some shade, not enough to be laying on it, and I listened to music until I passed out, woke up a few hours later, figured it might as well go home, and my mother started losing her. He just walked in, "I'm so sorry." "Where were you?" I left and went back to the cemetery, not really missing, but my parents flipped and filed a missing person report. When they couldn't find me, I was left at Walmart by them. The only reason they found me was because they retraced their steps, and Walmart was paging them every 5 minutes. Story 10, I was reported missing for a few days because I ran away from home at 16. I ran away with my 17-year-old boyfriend who was not reported missing by his parents. My parents had read through some of my chat messages. I had a habit of saving logs and knew I was likely heading north or west, but weren't sure. Thankfully, since I was listed as missing and they knew who I was with, the guy was being monitored and he used his debit card on the way. So they had an idea where I'd be. Cops came with a search warrant to the place we were staying a couple hours before we were going to head off west. We already had a new car ready to go with some cash to make it harder to be tracked. We're going to leave later that night. I'm very lucky. If we'd taken off before the cops found me, there's a more than decent chance I'd have stayed missing and life would have been very, very bad. I married the guy a couple months later, and he was an abusive. His manipulations and isolation of me were a huge factor in the running away also. I had a decent stay at a sheep farm while a ward of the state, though, waiting for my parents to arrive and get me. That was neat. Then I got home, and a family friend came over to scream at me about how I was trying to murder her daughter and that I was a disgrace. Not so neat. Story 11, not that interesting, but I was 14, and I decided to walk to my then boyfriend's house, which was an hour away walking, but I thought I could do it since it was still in the same city. Anyway, I sneak out the front door while everyone's asleep, and I almost got kidnapped. Some guy pulled up in his car on the side of the street where I was walking. There was no sidewalk, so I was in a shoulder, and I made the ugliest double chin face I could make, and picked up a rock trying to make myself look super ugly. So I wouldn't get kidnapped, and I just stood there with my double chins until he finally drove off. I kept walking. It's maybe 25 minutes later, and Eve now found myself passing nightclubs, and so many people outside drunk, and in short revealing clothes. That's when I got scared and went up to two policemen I saw in a corner. I told them I needed a ride home, and they asked for my info. I gave them my address and name. They looked me up on their computer and found out there was a missing person report out on me. When they dropped me off in front of my door, my mom was up, my sister, my aunt, and uncle and cousins were there. It was the most embarrassing moment of my life, and I never snuck out again. Story 12, I have a story, and it's actually about me. When I was 7 years old, everyone in my family got the flu pretty bad. My two younger sisters and I all shared a room adjacent to my parents, and my baby brother was sleeping in my parents' bed. Well, because of the illness, my two younger sisters were also sleeping in my parents' bed. At around 1:30 in the morning, I woke up and realized I was the only person sleeping in my room. Not wanting to be alone, I crawled into my parents' room and saw everyone cuddled on the bed, feeling incredibly jealous. I turned to go back to my room, but had a light bulb moment and figured out another solution. I bundled down to the bottom of the covers at the foot of the bed, completely covered. Around 2:15, my mother woke up to check on me, as mothers do. I wasn't there. Unusual. She checked for me in her bed, husband and 3 visible children. She goes downstairs and checked to see if I'm sleeping on a sofa or in one of the 2 guest bedrooms. We have one door in our house that's tricky and will sometimes swing open on its own accord. The door was open, checks both bathrooms, still no sign. At around 230, she woke up my father. It was early February and therefore quite cold out. My parents walked around outside, and they saw my footprints all around the house. However, I had been outside earlier that day, and it hasn't snowed in a few weeks. My parents were afraid I had become delirious and wandered outside in the cold, or worse. So after some heated discussion, they first called the police, and then our babysitter to watch the rest of the kids. In about 10 minutes, the entire police force of our tiny town is in our living room. They have lit up all 16 acres of our property with floodlights, and have lifted up a chopper in the county over to start search. All of my siblings were woken up and moved to the living room with the babysitter. Funnily enough, this is actually my youngest sister's earliest memory. The chief of police said they were going to crack search the house and started in my parents' bedroom. Naturally, the first thing they did was take the covers off the bed. The only thing I remember is being woken up by a police officer shining the light in my face and rudely ripping the covers off me. I was incredibly annoyed. Naturally, my parents were incredibly apologetic, but the officers were very good-natured and said not to worry about it, and that this was definitely the preferred outcome. About 5 months later, my father and I went to the local fire hall's annual fundraiser and performed a few songs that my dad had me learn specifically for this occasion, and he told the story of what happened to me that night, thanking the first responders for their quick action and good attitude. I think we donated some money, but honestly, I have no idea. I was slightly embarrassed because everyone was picking on me, but flattered enough by the fact that I got to sing for all of the adults that I didn't mind. That's probably the fastest way I've ever spent your hard-earned tax dollars. You're welcome. Edit format again. Story 13, I've been missing for about 5 years now. It really gives you a new perspective on how many missing people, particularly adults, either just don't want to be found or simply haven't contacted the particular people who file their report. The people who know where I am and what happened are the people I want to know that information. For a while, I was homeless and met several others who were also in the database or on the Charlie Project. Circumstances take you to places you never thought you'd go. It's not always as simple as being snatched off the street. And the ones who reported me didn't get anywhere by doing so. My trail went to a website of 150,000 other missing adults and just hangs out there perpetually cold. I'm fine with that. Story 14, I had a manic episode and went on a spontaneous trip and blocked everyone's numbers. Don't ask me why I was manic. I now know I have bipolar disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, and I've gotten help. Story 15, after a long period of estrangement, I went to visit my mother and father. This was after a long drive, and I was quite tired. My mother decided it was the perfect opportunity to berate me. I tried to leave, and she blocked my car physically so she could continue to berate me. I just left my car in the driveway and walked to a nearby hotel. I stayed there for a couple days, went back and got my car without seeing them, and drove back home. A few years later, I Googled myself as I was up for a job and wanted to make sure there wasn't anything stupid on the internet about me. I found out they reported me missing. I called the government and got it removed. Edit, this was over a decade ago, and I do not recall which government agency I contacted. It was either a sheriff's department or a local police department website, which publicly displayed my photo and my mother's nonsense. Edit, and yes, you're right, it does sound weird that I called the government. Considering the extent these events upset me, it makes me happy to laugh about it now. Story 16, a few times actually. The most interesting one is that my mom took me to my grandfather's house while I was sleeping. I was very small, maybe 4. I woke up alone. The house was dark and no one was answering. According to the Pluto cartoon I watched that morning, I was kidnapped. I broke out and started wandering the streets barefoot in my nightgown in the opposite direction of our house. Some sweet old ladies wrapped me up in a blanket and called the cops. Eventually, through good smaller town police work, he figured out who I belonged to because I only knew my nickname and not my address. Story 17, I got kidnapped by my mother, who currently wasn't allowed near me. Luckily, I got found that night. However, unluckily, I spent the next week waking up in a different foster home every day. That was a truly terrifying experience and one that stuck with me my whole life. Story 18 wasn't reported, but I went missing for a few hours as a teen. I was so depressed and horrifically deep in self-harm that I just said it to everything and started walking out of where I live with nothing but my iPod. I walked several miles out of town listening to music and just crying. I don't know how far I walked, probably a good 5-10 miles out, and I eventually turned back. ID jumped out of my bedroom window, which was still open, and I tried to figure out a way to climb back inside, but I couldn't. I eventually laid down on the stone driveway at the side of my house in the hopes I'd die due to hypothermia, as it was a winter's night. I was out there a good while, and nothing wasn't happening. So I eventually knocked on my back door. I was let in by my mother, who was relieved to see me. Story 19, I have really strict parents, and they absolutely did not want me to have a boyfriend. Instead of doing what they wanted, I went and got a boyfriend age 17, almost 18 behind their backs, and would routinely sneak out to hang with him. One night, he dropped me off at home, and my mom saw us kiss. She flipped her and started beating the out of me and threatened to kill me. So, when everyone went to sleep, I packed all my stuff in the middle of the night and left. I walked to my boyfriend's house clear on the other side of town and stayed with him. Woke up to multiple threats from my parents about how they were going to charge him with kidnapping or with being a predator. He was 20 at the time. I stayed there until they filed a missing persons report, and the police came and took me home. I ended up dating him for 2 years anyway, LOL. Story 20, I became a missing person during my first experience, family vacation. I was about 12 at the time. My parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents all got together for a big camping expedition. I met a couple of girls at the swimming pool, and they suggested I sneak into their tent that night at midnight to play truth or dare. My parents, my brother, and myself all shared one big tent. Everyone went to bed early that night, except for me. All I could think about was finally touching A, and that was more than enough to keep me awake. Finally, at midnight, I slowly creeped over to the tent exit and started to unzip it. And of course, that's when my mom woke up. She asked what I was doing. I told her I had to take A. So she handed me a roll of toilet paper, and I thought went back to sleep. I threw the toilet paper in the bushes and went on my merry way to tame some strange. Fast forward over 2 hours later, I had made out with a girl for the first time, touched a few, even rounded second base, and was feeling pretty good about myself. We noticed there were cars driving all around slowly, which was unusual being as late as it was. I decided to head back, just in case my mom noticed I was gone. I walk over a hill, still sporting a massive and obvious erection, only to be greeted by my entire extended family and about 6 cops. Turns out my mom heard a car speed off just after I said I was going to found the toilet paper I threw, and assumed I had been kidnapped. The cops told me they were about to put together a search party complete with K-9s. Everyone's crying and angry at me. I think the worst was when my grandfather, who was always a very reserved man, looked me dead in the eye and asked if I realized how utterly disappointed he was in me. Instant killer, I never did see those girls again. Story 21, I had a psychotic break. One day, I decided to head into the city to spend the day at museums and stuff. At some point during the day, I had a complete break from reality. I don't really remember anything at the time I was living with my parents, and when I didn't come home, they reported me missing. I was gone for 4 days. During that time, I'd gone and bought entirely new clothes and threw away everything I had, and I'd booked myself in a hotel room. I have no idea how police found me. Did they trace my phone or bank account, or is that something that just happens on TV? But they burst into the hotel room and got me seen to, and after that I was all right, but still with no real memory. I don't know what caused it or what I did for 4 days. Story 22, I was 9, and sometimes I would walk home after school. Sometimes my mom would come pick me up. One day I was invited to go to my friend's house down the block to work on a school project, and I called home from the school phone to see if that was okay. The line was busy, so I kept calling for nearly half an hour and couldn't get through. I started walking toward my friend's house on the same route I would normally walk home, hoping my mom would pass me. I was also thinking maybe I had mixed up my days because my mom hadn't come to get me. I told the office workers I was going to walk to my friend's house, and to let my mom know I had been calling since school got out. It took me about 15 minutes to walk there, and I started calling my mom again for the next hour. The line kept going to busy signal. I was getting really worried by that point, so I left, and on the way home a family friend saw me and said my mom had reported that I was missing. In the 15 minutes it had taken me to get to my friend's house, she had gotten off the phone with whoever she was talking to, driven to the school, didn't see me, waited a few minutes, then drove home and started calling the police, my dad, and anyone else she could think of to help look for me. It never occurred to her to ask any of the school staff if they had seen me, or to get off the phone for a few minutes in case I or anyone else was trying to call. The police even scolded her for tying up the line after they told her to keep it clear. Story 23, took off to clear my head about failing marriage. Contacted wife 2 days later. She filed missing persons, went abroad, and when I came back, got stopped by customs. They let me go and cleared the missing persons report. Nothing too exciting. Move on my part for not telling her I was going off grid. Sat alone in a classroom reading a kid's science magazine when I was at 2nd grade. Suddenly someone comes and shouting I found him. It turns out that my dad teacher at my school was looking for me for 3 hours. Story 24, I was never filed as missing, but it could have definitely happened. I was 4 years old. We were having a nice family vacation in the mountains. There was this thing called Baby Club, where parents staying at the hotel could leave their children to be cared for while they did their stuff. So my parents left me and my 7-year-old sister with them. The Baby Club took us to a nearby ice rink. Back then, I was an extremely quiet kid, so they kind of forgot me sitting on the bleachers and went back to the hotel. My sister at first didn't realize that I wasn't with them. She was only 7 years old. She was preoccupied with playing with the other kids. But after a while, she realized that I wasn't there and told the Baby Club people, hey, so where's my sister? Cue general panic. My parents were extremely worried. It was cold. I was 4 years old and alone. They didn't know what to do. And since I was so young, I could have been stupid enough to try to walk alone from the ice rink to the hotel. And it was quite far, especially for such a small kid. While they were panicking, I had enlisted the help of a random adult. The details get fuzzy. I was told the story by my sister and parents. I was too young to remember, but he asked me why I was there alone, and I told him they'd forgotten me. Then I told him my hotel, the room number, and my parents' name. He let me piggyback him and took me back. So there we were a few hours later, 4 years old me, piggybacking on the back of a really tall blonde stranger. My parents were so relieved they didn't even sue the place. It could have gone so wrong. I could have died in the snow. I could have been kidnapped. That really nice man could have been not so nice. I could have forgotten the hotel name and room number to this day. I have no idea how did I manage to remember that. I have really shitty memory, so thank you, friendly giant man. I would have probably died without you. Story 25. So this is kind of a wild story. I was pretty young when it all happened, so I know this from hearing it from family members. My grandmother lived 6 hours or something like that away from my family. Growing up, she would rarely come visit us at our house. Instead, my parents, brother, and I would go to our cabin in the mountains and meet her there. As it was a midpoint between both of our houses, My grandmother went a little bit crazy after her husband died a few years before I was born. Around this time, it was becoming more and more obvious that there was something wrong with her. She had some very strange beliefs and started to become a bit forgetful. One day we were all at the cabin. I was around 4 and my brother was around 5 at the time. That day, I guess my dad decided to go fishing without us all. My grandma was watching my brother and I, and my mom decided to take a nap. She woke up and the cabin was empty. There was no sign of my brother, grandma, or me. My dad got back shortly after, and he hadn't heard anything from my grandmother either, so my parents had no clue where we were and not sure how much time passed, but my parents were obviously freaking out. I think they phoned the police and were getting ready to make missing person reports when an unfamiliar vehicle pulled into the driveway. Out pops me, my brother and grandmother, and some random guy. Basically what had happened was my grandmother decided to take my brother and I for a walk in the woods without saying anything to my parents. Her being the forgetful old woman she is, she got us lost. Eventually, she found the highway and thought it would be safe for her, a frail 80-year-old woman, and 2 young children to hitchhike on a highway in the middle of the mountains, basically no man's land minus a ski resort here. And there, we were just lucky that the guy was super nice. Story 26, not me. But when I was in middle school, there was an episode of Seventh Heaven where pictures of missing children were scrolled through at the end of the show, and one of them was of a girl who rode on my school bus. Apparently, her parents were divorced or well on their way there, and her dad took her and absconded from her home state. I remember how eerie it felt to actually recognize one of the missing children photos posters, edited to add yes. There were a lot of phone calls to the hotline number provided and to the local PD from parents of the kids that recognized her. When she got on the bus the next day, she wasn't pleased. In hindsight, I don't think she knew she was missing. I really think she was under the impression that it was okay to be with her dad. She moved again shortly thereafter, I assume back to her mom's. I think of her often, and sometimes I wonder if that same episode still has the posters at the end. How many cases have been solved and kids found? Story 27, I hardly 1-year-old was 10 minutes away from having an Amber Alert on me when I was kidnapped by my grandparents. They were babysitting me and kept me for 2 days nowhere to be found. Then right before the alert came out, they filed for emergency custody and won the case. They then raised me very poorly for 8 years until I could live with my mom. Story 28, I was walking home from school when I blacked out. I apparently never made it home, and I woke up was found a week later in the costume shed at my high school. Edit, when I have no clue what happened, I remember heading home, then my drama teacher shaking my shoulder and calling the cops. I was wearing the exact clothes ID gone missing in, underwear, and all, which is really disgusting, which were filthy and torn. It also appeared that I hadn't had much to eat or drink in that time either. I obviously had to have had something, otherwise I would have been dead. Edit 2, the lock was smashed in from the outside, but whatever was used to do it wasn't found anywhere near me, nor the surrounding area. Story 29, I ghosted my abusive family in my 20s. Despite them knowing I was fine after calling work, and my friends that didn't know, they called the police and showed up at my door. Story 30, not quite in line with the question, but when I was in 7th grade, my choir group performed at a theme park inside a mall. We got some free time to bum around the mall after the performance. When it was time to go, one of the other kids told the teacher. I left with the family of another student. I had not. I returned to find the bus had left, and I was alone at 13, an hour from home. I found a mall cop and told him the situation. He brought me to the security office, and I called my parents. I held it together until I talked to my mom. Thankfully, my uncle was nearby and came to pick me up, so I didn't have to wait at the mall for my parents. I guess I was missing, but I was the only one who knew it for a bit. Story 31, not me, but my dad's oldest brother went missing for 3 years. He was just a piece of, though he was just partying and visiting different cities. When he ran out of money, he called back the family from Mexico City. Story 32, was missing for about 2 days. My family didn't notice, but the school did. I was 300 miles away, drinking my life away at a beach tow. Went there on a Sunday morning and told my dad I'm going to stay with my friend this week. I got on a train and drove for about 3 hours and rented a hotel for those 2 nights. Got drunk every day and made some friends. When I got back to school on Wednesday, people were so happy that I was alive. It was only 2 days someone started a rumor that I was kidnapped. Story 33, when I was 6 years old, I lived in Colorado for like 2 months. My parents were not the best. One day my mom leaves the door open. Don't remember why. I had never seen snow in person before, and it was like seeing an endless sheet of white across the world. I walked out the door to the sidewalk and decided to walk along the sidewalk. I was gone for 4 hours, just walking the same circular stretch of sidewalk. My parents drove through the neighborhood, called the police. They drove though the neighborhood. No one found me until I walked back up to the house. Kind of wish now, in retrospect, that I would have got lost and froze to death. Would have saved me 20 years of suffering. Story 34, I rose the bus to school. Didn't walk in a building, though. I went to a park about 3 miles down the road and spent the day there, walked home, and found my mom's house swarming with police. When she saw me, it got so quiet you could hear my heartbeat. I just stood there, staring at all the police, thinking WTF happened. Kate to her telling them I'm her missing child. They all looked pissed and leave after getting a statement and verifying her kid. Once they left, my mother started crying and asked me where I was. Me being a bright 9-year-old told her I was at X Park and found my way home all by myself. She was happy I was home, but furious I did that to her. For the next week, she drove me to and from school. Also, the first week I was unable to sit properly. Story 35, went to the woods to enjoy some LCD with the friends. Me and my friend, we drove separately. Made it to the campsite before dark and dropped the tabs. Our other friends couldn't find a campsite before dark and couldn't reach us because we were in the forest with no cell service. 9 a.m. The next morning we go into town to get breakfast, only to get pulled over cause our license plate was registered for a missing persons. The Denny's was good after and a quality trip in ways. Story 36, I wasn't technically missing, but one time my mother told me to get something she had forgotten on a nearby aisle of Walmart. I guess she forgot she needed the thing and checked out. About an hour of searching for her, I finally called her cell phone and asked where she was. She went home and was taking a nap. 10 minuets later, she picked me up and we went home. I was 7 at the time. Story 37, not me, but my brother. I think he was 8 at the time. My parents, 1 sister, 2 brothers, and I were at a big fair in a neighboring village. I had to stay with my parents, but my siblings could go and walk by themselves. Not uncommon for our area. We all had agreed to be back at the car in a certain time. When it was that time, everyone was at the car except one of my brothers. We first looked for him, but we couldn't find him. So my mom went to some police officers who were standing there. They immediately told all the other cops at the fair to look out for my brother. They thought he might have been kidnapped. After some time, there was still no sign of my brother. One of the cops suggested that he might went home with someone he knew or found some of his friends. My parents always told us to not go with someone we didn't know. So one of my parents went home with us and a cop, but my brother wasn't there. Then some cops were going to drive slowly the route home to see if he was walking home. We were all young, but we would know the way. When they were almost at our house, they saw him. He walked 8 km 5 miles home. He picked up some flowers for my mother, and he had pet some sheeps along the way. When the news came he was found, one of the cops got goosebumps from relief. He had kids in the same age range and was really afraid my brother was kidnapped. My brother walked home because he thought he was too late by the car. The whole search was a bit over 2 hours. He was the kid that gave my parents the most gray hairs out of the 4 of us. Story 38, when I was about 2, my mom sent me to Utah from Tennessee for my first visit with my dad since my parents split. She made him promise to sleep in hotels and call her each night at least until we got to Utah. Well, he never did, and she reported me missing. When they found me, I was in the backseat of a car in the middle of a field with glass stuck in my bare feet, and my dad was passed out drunk behind the wheel. I didn't see him again until I was 17. As an adult, try to rekindle that relationship. He lets it slide that he paid a homeless man, a stranger, to watch me sometime during this incident. My dad is worse off now than he ever was before, and I'm afraid for anyone he comes into contact with.